Part 1. The Eternal Boy in a Broken World, Puer Aeternus, and the Lost Fire of the Modern Soul. There is a man who never truly arrives. He dreams of greatness, but never commits. He speaks of purpose, but drifts like vapor. He loves the idea of love, but flees at the first sign of depth. He is charming, passionate, full of promise, and yet somehow perpetually absent. He is not a villain. He does not wound out of malice. But those around him often bleed anyway. Because he is never quite here, he lives in the future. He is in love with potential. He is allergic to limitation. He is the Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy. Carl Jung, in his deep descent into the mythic architecture of the psyche, encountered this figure not merely as a personality type, but as an archetype, universal, timeless, seductive, destructive. The Puer Aeternus, the eternal youth, lives in all of us. But in some, it takes the throne. It governs their desires, their relationships, their fears, their fantasies. And in our age, an age of overstimulation, perpetual adolescence, glorified freedom, and fear of aging, the Puer is no longer just a hidden shadow. He is everywhere. He is the man who refuses to grow. He is the culture that fetishizes youth. He is the soul that drowns in its own potential and calls it freedom. In mythology, the Puer is the child god Narcissus Icarus, Dionysus Peter Pan. All radiant, all tragic, each shining with divine energy, yet unable to bear the weight of form, of gravity, of responsibility. Jung saw in this archetype a powerful energy, but also a deep wound. The Puer Aeternus does not resist maturity because he is selfish. He resists because he is terrified. Terrified that to grow up means to die inside, to betray the divine spark, to become mediocre, ordinary, enslaved to routine. So he stays suspended, not truly living, not truly dying. A boy in the shell of a May, a dreamer afraid to wake up. And society in its own pathology rewards him. We live in a culture that has declared war on adulthood. Responsibility is seen as repression, commitment as imprisonment, depth as danger. The Puer fits perfectly in this world. He thrives in ambiguity. He masters the language of maybe, someday, almost. He knows how to promise without promising, how to perform intimacy without actually arriving. In the age of swipes, likes, and endless options, the Puer never has to choose. And without choice, he never risks loss. But without loss, he never truly loves. He remains intact, but empty, untouched by life, but untouched by what? The Puer is not merely personal, it is a collective wound. We have become a civilization that fears endings. We prolong adolescence. We anesthetize aging. We glorify rebellion, but fear sacrifice. We worship beginnings, but abort depth. This is not progress, it is paralysis. Jung saw that every archetype, when not integrated, becomes possessive. It takes over. The Puer, when not tempered by its opposite, the Senextis, the wise old man, becomes tyrannical. He sabotages every structure that could ground him. He flees stability like it's a coffin. But in doing so, he condemns himself to float forever in the limbo of unlived life. What makes the Puer so hard to confront is that he wears the face of light. He is radiant, creative, spontaneous. He is often an artist, a visionary, a lover of the cosmos. But beneath his flight lies a truth he dare not touch. He is running from his own descent, the descent into the earth, into responsibility, into suffering, into time. He is afraid of becoming a man, not because he doubts his strength, but because he has never learned to grieve, to say goodbye to the boundless innocence of childhood, to bury the fantasy of being everything, doing everything, avoiding all pain. And so he avoids the initiation that all souls must pass through, the death of the boy. This death is not the death of joy. It is not the death of creativity. It is the death of illusion, the death of the fantasy that one can remain forever untetheres and still be whole. Jung understood this death not as an end, but as a gateway. Only through the symbolic death of the puer can a man be reborn, not as a soulless adult, but as a grounded soul, capable of building, loving, grieving, leading. The man who has gone through this death becomes paradoxically more alive, because now his creativity has roots, his passion has direction, his love has weight. He is no longer a spark floating through the night. He is a fire that warms the world. But most never reach this threshold. They feel the call, the ache, the quiet desperation, but they distract themselves. They rationalize, they find new women, new jobs, new cities, new dreams, always seeking, never staying, because staying would mean facing the silence. And in that silence, the truth would speak. You cannot become yourself without giving something up. The puer cannot accept this. He wants transformation without sacrifice, depth without dissent. He wants the fruit, but refuses to plant. And so, he wanders. Not because he is free, but because he has no center. There is tragedy in the eternal boy. Not because he is bad, but because he is lost. Not because he lacks brilliance, but because he fears grounding it in the mundane. He lives in the possible. He dies in the real. And the worst part? He knows. He feels the shame, the loneliness, the futility. But he hides it behind charm. He speaks of destiny, of soulmates, of divine timing. He spiritualizes his fear. But deep down he knows. He has built his life out of escape. In the next part, we will explore this escape in greater detail. How the puer aeternus manifests in modern men, relationships, and culture. How technology, consumerism, and even spiritual movements feed the avoidance of depth. And how the death of the puer is not the loss of freedom, but its very beginning. Part 2. The Beautiful Escape. How the eternal boy hides in plain sight. The puer aeternus is rarely obvious. He doesn't wear a mask of failure. He is not collapsed in a corner, begging for rescue. On the contrary, he often appears thriving. He is magnetic, articulate, perhaps even successful. He starts projects with passion, dreams with conviction, seduces with follow. He speaks of purpose, destiny, divine timing. But behind the poetic language, behind the glowing eyes and big ideas, there's a subtle void, a fear he refuses to buy in, the fear of limitation. Carl Jung described the puer not merely as immature, but uninitiated, a man caught between birth and becoming, a soul stuck in a loop of beginnings. He lives in the realm of potential, the what could be. He thrives on the rush of novelty. But the moment something asks for grounding, for structure, responsibility, perseverance, he pulls away. Not loudly, not with cruelty, often with charm, a smile, a whisper. I just need time. I'm not ready. This doesn't feel aligned anymore. And he means it. He isn't lying. He simply hasn't learned how to stay. In modern culture, the puer is not only accepted, he is celebrated. Instagram feeds glow with wanderers, artists, digital nomads, soulpreneurs. The gospel of follow your bliss has replaced the ancient wisdom of carry your cross. And so the puer thrives. Because he never has to descend. He never has to root. He never has to suffer the slow burn of becoming. He can keep floating, surrounded by applause, bathed in light, spiritually justified in his avoidance. But light without weight becomes blinding. and applause without intimacy becomes noise. Eventually, even he cannot ignore the hollowness beneath his glow. You'll find the puer in relationships too. He falls in love easily, with intensity, with poetry, with stars in his eyes. He speaks of soulmates, synchronicities, signs from the universe. And for a while, it's beautiful. A whirlwind of feeling, of connection, of divine promise. But soon, love begins to ask for something he cannot give. Presence, patience, imperfection. Love, real love, becomes ordinary. It becomes inconvenient. It brings up wounds. And this, to the puer, feels like death, because he confuses the end of euphoria with the end of truth. He mistakes the descent into depth for a collapse of spirit. So he leaves, softly, sweetly, sometimes spiritually. He calls it alignment, but it is avoidance. And the one left behind often feels like she's been ghosted by a dream. Even in the spiritual world, the puer finds refuge. He becomes a seeker, a healer, a mystic. He chants, he journeys, he fasts, he floats in cosmic ideas. But again, the ground is missing. He confuses expansion with evolution. He confuses transcendence with transformation. He seeks higher states, but not lower truths. He wants union with the divine, but not with his shadow. He loves the sacred, as long as it doesn't ask him to make a budget, repair a relationship, or hold a crying child. And it's not his fault. Not entirely. We live in a society that has systematically removed the rites of passage. Boys no longer cross thresholds. There is no moment where someone looks into their eyes and says, "You are no longer a child. Now, you carry something." So the child remains in grown bodies, in powerful jobs, in sacred circles, unfettered, unanchored, unmudded. And they search, not for wisdom, but for themselves. But the self is not found in endless freedom. The self is forged in friction, in bearing weight, in staying when it's hard, in choosing something again and again, even when the high is gone. That's where the gold is. Jung warned that if the puer is not consciously integrated, he becomes possessed. And a man possessed by the puer begins to sabotage his own life. He builds, but never completes. He falls in love, but never roots. He starts, but doesn't stay. And each failure deepens the shame. But instead of facing it, he spiritualizes it. He says it wasn't meant to be. He says the energy shifted. He says the container couldn't hold his expansion. But beneath the words, the truth pulses us. He is afraid. Afraid of being ordinary. Afraid of being responsible. Afraid of being truly seen, without wings, without poetry, without escape routes. And yet beneath the fear, there is longing. The puer aches for something he cannot name. Not more pleasure, not more freedom, not another beginning, but something real. He longs to be held by something larger than himself, to belong, to build, to thrive. He longs to feel the sacredness of being a man, not in dominance, but in devotion, not in control, but in honor. He longs for initiation, but initiation does not come through choice. It comes through crossing the fire. It comes when life says, "Now you carry this. Now you lose what was never meant to be kept. Now you love even when it terrifies you." So how does the puer begin to awaken? Not by shaming himself, not by becoming rigid, not by killing his light, but by learning to descend, to sit with the ordinary, to bear repetition, to hold contradiction, to stay with the discomfort until it softens into truth. This is not glamorous. This is not a dopamine hit. This is the slow, aching art of maturity. In the next part, we'll explore that descent, the symbolic death of the puer, and the birth of the integrated man. A man who does not abandon his fire, but learns to carry it through storms, through seasons, into the very heart of the world. Part 3. The Descent of the Eternal Boy. Fire, grief, and becoming a man. The child lives for magic. The boy believes in flying, but the man must learn to walk with wounded feet through real earth, carrying real weight. This is the descent the poor Eternus fears most. Not the fall from grace, but the fall into gravity, into time, aging, commitment, failure, grief, into the body, into the limits, into the real. Carl Jung taught that this descent was not a punishment. It is a rite of passage, an initiation into the deeper layers of being. But unlike tribal cultures, where ritual marked this crossing, modern man is left to stumble alone, unprepared, unequipped, and often unaware of what is happening. So the descent arrives as depression, as breakdown, as loss, as confusion, as life suddenly refusing to respond to the old tricks, charm, escape, starting over. The soul has had enough of the floating. It is time to come down. But the fall is terrifying, because the poor has built his entire identity on potential. Who he could be, what he might do, where he might go, what she might become to him. Descent means letting go of the fantasy, not to become cynical, but to become available to what is actually here. And what is here is messy, imperfect, demanding, sacred. What is here asks not for your dreams, but for your presence. The descent strips illusions, and illusions are all the pure has worshipped. So it hurts. God, it hurts. But this is the pain of shedding the false self. This is the fire of becoming. It burns away the uncommitted lover, the escape artist, the spiritual bypasser, the performer of depth. And beneath all of it, shaking, shivering, terrified, is a man, finally unclothed enough to be real. Jung often spoke of the nigredo, the blackening phase in alchemy. It is the moment of rot, the moment everything falls apart. Not because life is cruel, but because the ego must die so the self can emerge. For the puer, this nigredo may look like losing the woman who finally asked for more. It may look like a job crumbling, a dream dissolving, a depression that won't lift. It may look like losing everything that once made him feel exceptional. But that's the point. Because he was never meant to be exceptional. He was meant to be whole. The descent asks the puer to make peace with the ordinary, to show up for the boring, the repeated, the hard, to keep a promise, to build a life, to face boredom and not run, to hold grief without numbing, to disappoint someone without abandoning them. He must learn the art of remaining. Remaining when love is no longer euphoric. Remaining when the mission feels unclear. Remaining when no one claps. Because remaining is the portal to meaning. Grief is the sacred companion of this descent. Grief for the boy he once was. Grief for the life he never built. Grief for the women he let down. Grief for the time wasted chasing phantoms. And here, something paradoxical happens. As the grief deepens, so does the strength. Because now, his heart is no longer a playground, it is a sanctuary. He no longer seeks a high, he seeks truth. And this truth is what makes him trustworthy. To himself, to others, to life. There comes a moment in the descent, quiet, unglamorous, holy, where the man looks at his own shadow and says, I forgive you. And now, I take responsibility. This is the moment the poor dies, and the man is born. Not the rigid, repressed, shamed version of manhood, but the one who holds both, fire and form, freedom and force, wildness and wisdom. He doesn't abandon his dreamer. He teaches the dreamer how to build. He doesn't kill the child. He fathers him. He becomes the man the boy never had. And here begins the true alchemy. For when the puer dies consciously, He is reborn not as a slave of adulthood, but as a sovereign soul. He learns that structure is not death. It is safety. That discipline is not repression. It is devotion. That commitment is not confinement. It is the garden where love grows. He becomes a man, not of promises, but of presence. Not of sparks, but of warmth. Not of fantasy, but of truth. This transformation cannot be rushed. It cannot be fought. It cannot be taught in a course or claimed in a caption. It must be waved. It happens in silence, in falling down and getting up again. It happens in saying no to escape, yes to staying. It happens in slowly, painfully, miraculously learning how to be here. In the next and final part, we will bring this journey to completion, exploring what an integrated life looks like, how the sacred masculine is reborn through this descent, and what the world desperately needs from the man who has chosen to grow. Part 4. The birth of the grounded man. From possibility to presence, the boy dies. Not in punishment, but in passage. Not in shame, but in sacred necessity. And from his ashes, a different kind of fire is born. Not a fire that dances wildly in search of the next thrill, but a fire that holds, steady, quiet, ancient. A hearth, a home. This is the integrated man. He carries the dreamer within him, but the dreamer no longer drives. He carries the ache for transcendence, but no longer avoids the real. He knows the taste of sky, but he has learned to love the soil. Carl Jung saw individuation, the lifelong process of becoming whole, as the central task of a meaningful life. And for the man once ruled by the puer aeternus, that process begins with the surrender of fantasy and ends in the sacred reclaiming of presence. He no longer seeks to be everything. He chooses to be someone. He no longer chases every light that flickers. He builds a fire and tends to it. And here lies the deepest paradox. It is only when he accepts his limits that he becomes limitless. The integrated man does not despise the boy he once was. He blesses him. Because the boy was beautiful, naive, yes, escapist, yes, but also filled with light, with visions, with longing. The man does not kill the boy. He fathers him. He creates a container for that wild, radiant energy. He becomes the inner elder the boy always needed, a steady hand, a voice that says, "I've got you. You don't need to run anymore." This inner reconciliation is the true healing. Not exile, but embrace. Not repression, but integration. And what does this man look like in the world? He is not loud. He is not perfect. He does not seek to impress. But when he speaks, there is weight in his words. When he loves, there is safety in his touch. When he works, there is integrity in his effort. When he suffers, he does not escape. He endures. He can sit with a crying woman without needing to fix her. He can be bored without running. He can lose something he loves and still choose to stay alive. He can be tempted and still choose depth over distraction. He has become anchored. And the world feels this, because the world is starved for men like this. Not swallows, not heroes, not flawless providers or emotionless protectors, but men who are here, who have walked through their own fire, who have stopped performing, who are not seeking applause, but seeking to be in service to truth, to love, to the sacred work of being human. This man builds slowly. He knows what it costs to build. He knows that everything of worth, a marriage, a friendship, a life, requires tending, failing, beginning again. He doesn't worship success. He worships meaning. He has wept enough to no longer need to win. He has failed enough to no longer fear failure. He has loved and lost enough to know that it is better to love deeply and risk pain than to remain untouched and unmoached by life. He carries no illusion that wholeness means constant bliss. He knows life is messy, that some days are heavy, that grief arrives unannounced, that even healed wounds ache in the rain. But he is no longer fleeing. He is inhabiting. His life becomes a new offering. His time becomes sacred. His word becomes clean. His joy becomes quiet and contagious. This is the man the poor could never become until he descended. And here lies the final paradox. In the death of the dream of being everything, we become the ones we were always meant to be. Because presence, real presence, is more powerful than perfection. Depth is more fertile than drama. And love, in its mature form, is not an endless high, but a sacred homecoming. Jung taught that the shadow once faced becomes the source of vitality, and the puer aeternus, once integrated, becomes a wellspring of renewal. He becomes the creative spark that feeds the fire, but not the one who burns the house down. He becomes the voice that dares to imagine, but is willing to get his hands dirty, making it real. He becomes the wind in the sails, but no longer throws himself overboard when the sea gets rough. He becomes a man, not just male, but a soul deeply rooted in his own becoming. And now, at the end of this journey, we return to the silence beneath it all, to the boy who once feared limits, to the man who now blesses them, to the hunger that once sought constant escape, to the heart that now finds joy in remaining, to the soul that once floated and now walks, slow and steady, toward home. And I leave you with this question. What part of you is still running from the weight that could make you whole? Let that question take root. Let it grow. Let it guide you, not back to the sky, but down into the real earth, where the fire becomes light and the boy becomes a man.